Welcome everybody to a late night stream. We come here to party and have a good time. No, I got Jim, who has got his own podcast coming up, Meaning Forge. I've got Dog, also known as Steve, but we just call him Dog. And then I've got Slompy, also known as Mark, and we just call him Dum Dum. No, it's we're going to talk about Jesus Mythicism because it seemed to have come up a lot lately. And Dog says he thinks I would look better with some rune tattoos. I got some tattoos, bro. You want me to start? I'll just start showing the tattoos. I got one on my chest. You want me to take my shirt off? Not. I don't do that stuff for free. At least not anymore. Mark said no. All right. Oh, so let's jump right into it. Oh, we got Travis. Hey, we've got somebody hanging out with us late. Sweet. Travis, we're going to talk about Jesus Mythicism. Seems to be a lot of that coming up lately. So, Dog, you're the only non-Christian here. Why don't you tell us your opinion on mythicism? Are you stay muted, or are you going to actually talk, or
look at the chat?
What's the deal? Oh, okay.
Mic's not working.
All right. Yeah, he's having technical difficulties. So, Mark, what do you think about it?
I think if someone wants to stick to looking for only empirical data, even when it comes to historical people, they can do that. I just want them to be consistent. And I'm not going to think I don't think it's the best position. Not too much else to say there.
Yeah. I would agree. It's, a lot of people are real hard on mythicists, and while I don't think it's a really a position to hold or a hill to die on, anytime we're talking about ancient history, there are reasons to doubt some things, and I think a lot of times it leads to I think a lot of people are just really hyper skeptical, and
especially when it comes to Jesus, right? Like they don't hold this sort of skepticism when it comes to another historical figure or something, right?
Yeah, I actually want to address that point. I'm gonna let Jim give his opinion, and then there's something I want to say on that point. So what are you thinking about it, Jim?
So overall, what I see is I think it's part of the framework, like the way they proceed, like the way that we're looking at the world. Like everybody has their own framework, and so when you see the Bible as myth to begin with, which I think that's kind of how they would see it. Like they see it as a collection of stories or something that's not real, which then makes it a myth according to the common vernacular. And then from there, it just only makes sense that Jesus would be a myth in the collection of myths. And I think there are some good and interesting arguments about who Jesus was, when Jesus was, how Jesus died. That puts a lot of difficulty in finding the exact truth, kind of alluding to your point earlier that, as we move in history, like as history moves forward, what happened yesterday the events of yesterday based off of memory and all other fun stuff can essentially become myths because it become exaggerated over time, or whatever happens due to bias or something like that. So these stories lose their factual, we'll call it factual value over time at some level.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good assessment. That's so I was talking about the oh, look at Pasta Mike's in the house. What's up, dog? I am so flattered you came to visit me. Uh, he knew we'd be talking some garbage, so he come to see, what garbage going to fill his ears. Uh, it's so I'm sure that there's a lot of people, in philosophy that's familiar with Liz Jackson. Mark, you're familiar with Liz, right?
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah, and I think she makes a good point. And that is, when you look at the philosophers of the past, they all tend to be the skeptical philosophers, David Hume, and others. They tend to be global skeptics. They're skeptical about pretty much everything. And it seems a lot of times, with the mythicism, they're more of a local skeptic. It's just God claims that they're skeptical about, not just Christian God claims, but God claims in general. And, which being a skeptical person myself, I kind of go back and forth on it because, there's a lot of things that the Bible talks about that, coming from a skeptical position, it's hard to swallow. But I think that's where, it needs to be, understood that when mythicism needs to be put into two categories. When people say that Jesus existed, um, the thanks, Pasta Mike. I love you, man. See, the ADD done kicked in now. The Oh, with mythicism, we got to understand that when we say that Jesus existed, we're not saying as the supernatural Son of God and things like that. So I think a lot of people, when you break it down, they try to take the whole bundle together and say, because Jesus existed, that means he did all these things. And I think that's two totally different arguments, because progressive Christians often deny the physical resurrection of Christ. They deny pretty much everything that's supernatural in the Bible, yet they hold to a real Jesus that existed. So I think that's something that's real important when discussing this topic, that we need to make it clear that just because one, admits or agrees that Jesus existed, it doesn't mean you have to admit he did all of the supernatural things. That's a different argument for a different way. Um, so anybody want to add to that, or no?
Yeah, I feel like they don't have anything to lose in just saying, Jesus existed, right? I think it's the most reasonable position to hold. We got lots of outside sources, not just the sources including the Bible. Though I think you can conclude that he existed just off of the Bible. I think the outside sources just back that up further, right?
Right. Yeah, it's when you look at the even if we said that there's a consensus in history that Jesus existed, I mean, to be fair, that's not the same as a scientific consensus. A lot of people who actually study this really aren't even historians. There's a lot of them that are just Bible scholars, and on both sides, agnostic, atheist, and Christians. But as far as historians go, most of the academics in historians actually, don't believe that there's really a good reason to deny that, a Jesus existed. And like I said, it's a different issue when we start talking about the supernatural things. That's a little bit harder to, explain and get some people to understand or agree with, and I understand that part. But when we're talking just the historical part of it, of course, everybody likes to bring up Bart Ehrman. He has pretty good choice words for Jesus Mythicists. And, Richard Carrier did his book on it. He takes more of a Bayesian approach to it, which I'm kind of sympathetic to, because my epistemology is starting to kind of lean towards a probabilistic Bayesian style epistemology. I'm still kind of in the air on that. Traditionally, I was Reformed epistemologist, but leaning more and more evidentialist and probabilistic, kind of like Trent Doherty. But so when we talk about scholars who study this issue, how do, and maybe for you can put in on this, Jim, how do you think that a Richard Carrier or someone like Richard Carrier, I'm just using his name because he seems to be the biggest mythicist today, and he is an academic guy, and he's respected a bit for his credentials. How do you, in your opinion, how do we get to the point where where people are willing to go to such lengths to ad hoc rationalizing and things of that nature? Do you think it's strictly to avoid the supernatural? What do you think about that?
So there's probably a lot of things there that I'm probably not going to be able to think through adequately at some level, because people are pretty complex.
Yeah.
And so what I would say is that Richard Carrier's maybe again, I'm not very familiar with his work, but I mean, okay, he's a mythicist, he's an atheist, and he focuses on empiricism or something to that effect. Okay, well, there is some key indicators there. There's nothing wrong, I think, with any of those positions at some level, because the issue is it's what's relevant to people and how they identify things that are relevant. And for him, his position, or for him and maybe many others, his position seems to be speculative, of course, that Jesus is a myth. Okay, well, if that's the case, then if Jesus is a myth, how are we getting to this? That's like, how and why are we getting to this position? And if he's getting to this position by, let's say, again, because the framework here, he's looking at it because it's a series of myths or a collection of myths, the Bible, and comparing that to other myths, the Norse mythology, the Egyptian mythology, the Eastern mythologies, Oceania mythologies. All these other mythologies all have different components and different things to them that fundamentally change, that make them somewhat unique. Yes, there's some common themes like Joseph Campbell's hero's journey and stuff like that. However, to apply, like, for example, that the Jesus, and I'm going to use the terminology here, the Jesus myth is like the who is it? The guy who travels to Hades and grabs his wife. Myth. Oh, it's not. Anyway, Orpheus. Yeah, Orpheus.
Oh, yeah.
So
I'm not big on ancient myths, so you're
it's Greco-Roman. It's Orpheus travels down and then he goes to hell and he comes back. And some people say, well, that's just like Jesus, and I'm like, not really. And also, you also see in this mythicism an interesting way, like an epistemological standard of how we get Christianity, which is influenced by other mythologies, which isn't necessarily, I don't know if that's necessarily true. I I would say that like you have to find the causal evidence almost to the point that it is like very clear and not through some artist depiction or something to that effect of what myth of the Jesus myth or something to that effect. So being very careful there, like what's the causation? Show me the cause and effect. Don't show me the similarities or the correlation.
Right. And I think that brings up a good point, and that is, we often hear from skeptics, you know, well, he just mimics, a bunch of mythologies, and they, start kind of, throwing out different mythical figures in history. But when I think that quite often it's overstated, because when you start looking into these different mythical, characters on the past, like I've heard Jesus compared to, I think it's Christus in Hinduism, and the or Krishna, is it Krishna?
Yeah, Krishna. And,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Supposedly, he had died on a cross and was supposed to be resurrected and these different things. But when you really look at the story, he's like, he was killed in a field, under a tree or by a tree or something. And I think he was shot with an arrow. Or so while one could, in a, I guess, what do you call it? The exaggeration, the artistic exaggeration, creative way. I mean, people could apply some type of creative imagination and draw some parallels there.
Yeah.
And, but also on the other side of that, to deny that any ancient myths or cultures or things of that nature didn't have some influence, I think is also an error too, because, for example, like with the Jewish people, they talk about the god El, and the gods that they had, and and then God was called Elohim and things of that nature. And I think it's often misunderstood when they say, well, they stole the god or things of that nature. But you talk about God in the way that your culture and your language portrays things. So it only makes sense that if they are subjected to this culture with these different gods or mythological creatures and things of that nature, that they're going to talk in ways that are similar, because we don't talk about gods or mythology or things in this total far out way that's foreign to us. It just doesn't make any sense to, just come up with this some crazy language or characters or things of that nature that doesn't have any similarities to, what we're used to. So, with Carrier and things, I think another thing that a point that needs to be said is, admitting that there was a historical Jesus gives no ground whatsoever to Christianity or theism. You're not giving up any ground at all. There are good arguments or decent arguments against the existence of God. The divine hiddenness, the evil and suffering. Those are pretty decent arguments, against God, and far more tenable than, just trying to deny the central figure. But I guess that's probably where some of them come from. If we could show that the central figure, didn't exist or something of that nature, then it undercuts the whole thing. And in my case, I would still be a deist, probably, because I'm thoroughly convinced by the arguments for God that, there is a God, so I would be maybe some type of pantheist or deist or something of that nature. I just think the Christian God and Christ, to me, correlates to reality, the best. And it's, and I keep quoting this quote, and I still haven't looked it up to remember who said it, but, it's the absurdity of Christianity, is why I believe, because, it goes against every common hero of, mythology. That's just not how heroes and messiahs and gods are portrayed. They don't come from a lowly family with a lowly job and a insignificant people, in the grand scheme of the world, things of that nature. So, anything you want to add to that, Mark? Or
No, not really.
then why did you come on, Mark?
No, I was just reading up a little bit on mythicism, but it seemed like you were kind of going towards if you believe that God exists. But yeah, I agree. You can accept Jesus existed, like most scholars in the area of New Testament studies do, right?
Yeah.
And I think you should.
Is there proof that Muhammad existed?
I think there's pretty significant evidence that he did. It's to be honest with you, I studied more about Muhammad and his life than I did the historical, records from Muhammad. That's a pretty good question. So, Dog, while you're sitting there not talking and staying muted, why don't you look up the historical facts for Muhammad for us?
I mean, we also know Joseph Smith existed. He's the one who created Mormonism.
Yeah, the Latter-day Saints. He's the golden tablets and
Now we don't know all the other details of that. Like that is debatable.
Right. Yeah. Well, he had the golden tablets, but he's the only one that ever saw them. Nobody else saw them.
Exactly.
And so, and it's funny you bring that up. I don't really care to bash Mormons, even though it's easy to do. But it's the guy had already been locked up several times for being a swindler. I mean, he was a character, and when. Oh, who was that? See, I'm terrible with quotes, man. It's was it Maya Angelou that said, when someone shows you who they are, believe it. So when a swindler goes to jail several times for swindling people and he's the only one that's seen the golden tablets, I mean, the guy's pretty much told you everything you want to know. And it's kind of funny. When you look at their theology, it is so odd. It is, they think Christ was the brother of Satan. They think that Christ became a god and we are all going to be gods, possibly have our own creations. And it's so far out there. I don't even know where he got half of the stuff from that he espoused. But when I look at because I did an extensive amount of, I don't know if I'll say study, but an extensive amount of reading over years about the life of Christ and his historical significance and the evidence that's there, and one of the main disagreements that I hear, is, well, what do we have outside the Bible? And it's like, it really, you don't dismiss the Bible because it is a book that's followed by Christians, because the Bible is not a book. It's a collection of letters and sermons and biographies and, historical narratives. And I mean, every type, when you take a literature class in college, most literature classes, they study the Bible because of the literary richness that is there, because you have just about every form. You have poetry, you've got, I mean, everything that's there. My wife when she took her literature class, the Bible was one of them that they spent quite a bit of time on, not because of the theological aspect, it's a public college. It was because of the amount of literature and styles of literature that was in it, because it's so rich and ancient. And, they did other ones too. It wasn't just the Bible. But people want to toss it out as if it's just one theological book, and it's like,
Yeah.
I disagree with you a little bit. Yes, it is. It's parts of an individual whole, I think, and at some level, you have to look at it as a narrative from it, because it does have a structure of a narrative, a beginning, a middle, and an end. And I would be very careful to say that it's just a collection of independent sources, because then you lose the importance of a narrative and you lose the importance of.
No, I'm talking specifically from a historical perspective.
Oh, okay. I mean, even from a historical, even from a literary perspective, it still has a narrative. It's structured in a way that it's like its own saga.
Yeah, it's synergistic for sure. There is a synergy from the beginning to the end. Absolutely, I agree with that.
I mean, I think you could do that with or lots of books that have happened in the past. But I still think that they are independent sources regardless, right? And a historian would analyze them each separately. So saying like there was a flood somewhere else in Genesis has nothing to do with the history of or historical case of Jesus, right? It doesn't really play a part, despite any sort of narrative you want to draw.
It absolutely plays a part in Jesus.
What does
it?
In Genesis? Yes, it does.
No, I was talking about like the flood,
Oh, well, but Jacob.
I was just saying you can say
no. Wait, well, hold on a second, Jim. See, I would disagree. You could read the entire Old Testament and never come to Jesus.
Yes, but without Christ, so this is the problem with the idea of the narrative in some ways, and we can probably parse this out a little bit, but you still have to keep, because it's written in a story with a beginning, a middle, and an end. It still has to be coherent, and so it can still foreshadow. You can still do those things, and for example, Noah does foreshadow. The story of Noah does foreshadow Christ. Why? Because Abraham is part of Christ's lineage, just like all the other lineage things. Like every one of those people is part of the lineage of Christ. Jacob, when he falls asleep and he wrestles with the angel, or he does Jacob's ladder, that is also another foreshadowing of Christ.
Sure.
Right. Yeah, but you're getting into a theological area of it, and I'm speaking specifically from a historical.
Yeah.
But so that's what I meant by it's not a book. It's because a lot of historians look at all four gospels as independent sources, even though there may be a Q document or there may be borrowing. They all have different stories of the same person. They have similar stories and they have different stories. And when you start looking, in textual criticism, when they start looking, you can look at ancient documents. There's internal evidence there to tell if it is from a different source, if there are other sources that are mixed in with it. So when we look at Paul's letters were letters to churches. It was addressing specific issues with the churches that he had written to. We look at the book of Hebrews. The book of Hebrews was a homiletic. It was a pastoral preaching type of book. Then we look at the Gospel of Luke. Luke was, as he's been called, the historian, because by a lot of historians, his accuracy was considered phenomenal, especially for ancient history, because the way that they wrote in ancient history, they weren't concerned about chronological order. They weren't concerned about even getting everything accurate, because that's just not the way that the culture was. It was about conveying points. What are you laughing at? I got to see what you're laughing at now.
No, it's the side chat. Dog's trying to get it hard, man. He's trying to, but he really needs a mic, because it's like, here, let's brain dump everything on my brain to Mark, so I can make this argument, and then Mark will inevitably misrepresent my points. You gotta get your mic, man. You gotta fix that technical issue. That's the best way to do it.
I'm gonna misrepresent Dog's points
potentially.
let me finish my point, guys. Come on now. So anyway, yeah. So I think a lot of people are ignorant of textual criticism and how that works. So when historians look at these different documents, they're looking at them, and most historians, the majority, overwhelming majority, agree that there appears to be different sources, for these narratives. While some do share, there's a lot of differences and nuances to each one that would lend to them being a separate source.
So,
And then,
so if you don't mind, I think, are we talking about corroboration? Like the corroborativeness of the Bible in context of the real world?
well, I don't
As
know.
well.
I don't know about corroboration.
Well, corroborative evidence, right? So, like, for example, I have two pieces of evidence. They both point to the same thing.
Yeah.
They corroborate. So, for example, Paul's letters to the church of, what is it? Whatever. Pick a church, any church. And that letter is now captured, right? We know that that church existed. So therefore it's very likely, and around this time frame, that Paul wrote, since he was a major player in the church at this time, wrote to them to, fix whatever issue that they were having. And maybe there's another piece of evidence.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what they look at for, they look for historical accuracy, such as, are they writing about real people that existed that we can corroborate with what we know at the time, places that existed, how well they knew the geography, all of that's why Luke is called the historian and one of the most accurate ancient historians, because so much of Luke's people, places, and things has been corroborated with archaeological evidence, or other writings in the area. So when we start looking at all these things that are historically accurate, and when you start, like, let's say you're doing an analysis on this ancient scripture. So let's say Jesus is a hero, and I mean hero in the sense of mythology. He's the central figure. He's the one that's the focus of the mythology.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when you look at a typical hero in mythology, he doesn't fit any of them, because he's not the great, powerful hero. He's not the political figure. He's not the rich, wise, super smart. I mean, he was wise, but he doesn't have all these attributes.
You can extrapolate Joseph Campbell's hero myth onto Christ in some ways. Like you can, it can be interpreted in that way. But again, the hero myth itself isn't enough, I think, to sit there and say it's a myth, right? Because the reason why is because there's enough, and I think this is the best way to look at it. There's enough corroborative evidence that supports that this person was real.
So when you say the hero narrative, I mean, what about Christ's life and the writings that we have would resemble any mythological hero? I mean, I don't know any that would be.
Hang on, let me pull it up.
Yeah, I'm definitely interested in that.
I don't have to do it like ad hom, but like I can kind of structure it, because I can see it. I just need all this. I kind of need the steps to kind of structure it a little bit.
While you do that, I'm gonna. Dog had looked up the about Muhammad, and his what he had found was currently, however, only a minority of historians of early Islam doubt Muhammad existed. Patricia Crone, there's a bunch of sources here, but Patricia Crone states there is no doubt that Muhammad existed. Occasional attempts to deny it notwithstanding, and notes Byzantine sources that mentioned an Arab prophet. Michael Cook takes the view that the evidence independent of Islamic tradition precludes any doubt as to whether Muhammad was a real person, and clearly shows that he became the central figure of a new religion. So it seems like it's kind of the same boat there. There's fringe who would deny his existence, but it seems like, historians' perspective, it's pretty well accepted that he existed. So
Okay.
that's information.
I would just like to say, Luke was a physician, so I'm not too sure if he was a scholar. I know some people think he knew, he was literate, right? He was a smart guy, and he was a physician. And Colossians 4:14 actually says, "Our dear friend Luke, comma the doctor, and Demas send greetings." So he's labeled as a doctor even in the Bible, right? From a letter.
He's called the historian because of the accuracy of his historical accounts. I don't know if he was actually like an academic historian, but
Mhm.
I know that he's called the historian because he was so detailed, and so much of what was written about places and things at that time has been corroborated. So
Yeah, and he wrote specifically to the Gentiles too, which you can see with the text. So yeah, it's just he was a literate, highly authoritative writer, I guess.
yeah, and when you and the discipline of like I was talking about with textual criticism, um you there's so much that you can find out when we investigate these letters and these you know biographies, or I know at one time the gospels were considered mythology. However, they actually fit the genre of a Roman biography. They don't hit all the points of a Roman biography, but they have significant amount of similarities in Roman biographies. So it's not like it was this writing of the time that's just totally, um, contrary to the times that it was written. So we can see a lot of similarities between Roman biographies and that. So when the Gospels say they're a biography, or they're when they present themselves as a biography and they have the markers of biography, in the past, some people had just chalked it up to mythology. Well, if it's presented as a biography and it fits, the format of a Roman biography, um, then, the burden is on those who want to call it mythology to show how it's myth. Because if we look at it as it's presented and it fits the format and we have historical markers, to compare with it, the places, the people, things of that nature that are there. Well, there's no reason to be skeptical of, uh, you know, the writings about Christ and who they're writing about, because they've been shown to represent styles from the time, and accurate things at the time. So when people want to question it or say, well, it's just myth, or they made this up or whatever, well, then the burden's on you, because that's a claim, that's a positive proposition. Um, when you are going counter to what the evidence shows, you need a good argument, or good evidence to show that we shouldn't accept, you know, uh, prima facie what it is. And I think that's where a lot of this gets, because I hear people, oh, it's just a made up religion, or they just made this person up, or he was legendary, or things of this nature. And it's like, and you can't just throw things out there like that and expect people to, believe it, because, while you're asking for evidence for this, and this, you're literally given, empty assertions and not given any evidence for it. Well, what's easier to believe? And I'm like, well, it's not about what's easier to believe. It's about what the evidence points to. And I think a lot of times that's where inconsistencies come in with those who question, the historical nature of, the New Testament as a whole. Is people want to, you know, be skeptical about it, and not accept it as it's presented and as it fits historically, yet they don't have any evidence to the contrary. So I mean, if somebody wanted to present some kind of evidence other than incredulity that what's easier to believe or things of that nature, I'm willing to hear it, because a lot of times Christians, the people don't think that Christians are looking for sincere truth. And I'm telling you now, I don't want to follow what's false, and if there's defeaters for my belief, then I need to adjust my beliefs. We shouldn't hold false beliefs. I don't think that anybody would disagree with that.
Well, it depends on what you mean by false.
That's
the next thing.
Not true.
Well, see, here's the thing. Well, no, here's the thing, right? Like that's a naturalism point of view. There's two ways you can look at what's true, what's relevant, and what's actually naturally true. So, as for example, I can tell you that I need to lose weight. That's a true statement, okay, because of X number of things. But it's also not relevant to me because I don't want to lose weight or any number of other things. So that would then make me irrational, or I would hold an irrational belief if that's the case, according to the fact that I need to lose weight because I'm fat.
Yeah, I don't think we're going to.
That's a whole nother ball game, and like that. But that does play a big part into this, as far as a form of, I would almost say, and not to call people out, but that's a form of confirmation bias. I think at some level, if you think all myths or all religions are just made up stories and they're myths, then isn't this another form of confirmation bias coming out?
I would agree with that, but I would push back on relevance having anything to do with truth.
That was the major issue between the sophists and the naturalism and the naturalists.
Yeah, I just, to me, relevance is doesn't play any part in whether something is objectively true or false. Now, you also got to understand in philosophy, when we talk about truth, false, justification, things of that nature, these are entire fields of philosophy. So this is obviously not something that we would be able to completely parse out here. But I would say, to me, there is an objective truth. To me, truth would be, that which correlates with reality. I don't think that being relevant really has any.
I think we're opening up a can of worms that we don't want to open up.
Yeah,
no. To be honest with you, I think it would detract from the actual conversation that we're having. Because that leads into for example, well, what is real? Because then we have a whole conversation on what is real, and that's a whole another thing in and of itself.
What is real is what exists.
See, there we go. So, I mean, but at the end of the day, there is this idea of relevancy. I think I see Dog's point as far as when you on the side chat here about at the end of the day, history can be interpreted through any number of lenses.
Yes.
All right. And more importantly, the historical narrative, you literally have to pick your evidence, right? Whatever your evidence is, for example. This is where you can lead to some conspiratorial thinking as well, and it still be historically accurate. But you're trying to connect things. I'm not reading the paper you sent. Anyway, and you connect these different narratives. So, for example, I mean, right now, I think we had an interesting narrative or two competing narratives in U.S. political discourse. Right, which was the 1776 project and the 1619 project. That's a great example of how you're using history to drive forth a relevant argument or some relevancy aspect to convey a point. I mean, Lincoln did the same thing. Presidents have done the same thing. The Federalist Papers are the same thing. There's all these things. When you call upon history, you're using it to support a narrative. And so this is where it can start to get very convoluted very quickly. And so how do you determine what is historical fact versus what is historical fiction when it starts to being parsed out further and further and further and further away from the primary documents, which are, for example, the letters or something like that of Paul?
Yeah, that's definitely a rabbit hole I don't want to go down. not on this broadcast.
Well, but it does deal with mythicism a little bit because
It does,
you can create
yeah, it
myths out of that. So, for example, you can create a myth that Abraham Lincoln was X, or George Washington was Y, or
Right.
this person was this. Like, you can create myths out of these things, and you run into some issues as far as
Would you say it
corroboration.
would be more legend, though? I mean, it's not really a myth. It would be, they created a legend based on a real figure.
Well, I mean, if that's the case, then Jesus would be a legend.
Well, that's the accusation, is that Jesus was really insignificant, and he became a legend, legendary. But at that point, I would even accept that over mythicism.
I mean, at the end of the day, I think the way we use them in our vernacular is, we don't say just myths. We say myths and legends, because they kind of fit into the same bubble of what,
Yeah, when I say legend, though, I'm not talking, colloquially. I'm talking by the, the more technical sense of what it is, because obviously you're far more versed in, ancient mythology than I am. But, with myth, do I?
I'm not that versed, man. I don't have the originals.
I haven't done hardly any research on ancient, only what bleeds over into Christianity and things of that nature. So, I mean, I have a decent understanding because of the study that I did on other religions. But I didn't get into, the Norse gods and things of that nature. They didn't interest me. So when I say legend, I'm talking in a more technical sense, that it was an actual person and his life just became legend,
Yeah.
So given that, when we, a lot of people want to, and this is something that I'll point out quite a bit, a lot of people, I'll tell them you're making a genetic fallacy when they deny the New Testament as being a good source because it's a Christian document, or Christians are the ones who created it. And, a lot of times people don't understand exactly what a genetic fallacy is. The reason it's a fallacy is because when you dismiss the source, it does not address the truth of the claim. And it's considered, and I make sure to make them understand that you're you're committing a genetic fallacy because you're dismissing it based on the source. That doesn't affect the truth of the claim. So we have to get, and I try to implore them to get away from just because, yes, there may be bias. Absolutely. Nobody's saying that there's not. I would actually go as far as to say there's a lot of bias because a lot of it has theological implications. And the ones writing it were trying to convey theological messages. But they were writing it in a way where they were addressing people who already accepted, who Christ was a real person. They're writing it in a way, they're not trying to convince people that Christ is real. And that's the thing is, one thing that gets lost in the smoke of it all is when you look at these letters, they're almost none of them are trying to convince anybody that Christ is real. They're all trying to convince them that he is the Messiah. It's almost, if you look at it, it is understood and accepted as everybody knows who Christ is. And so when we start looking at these documents, and they're saying, oh, it's just made up with by a bunch of people. Well, they did a horrible job of making it up, because they're not even making a case for him. It's just, it's written as assumed that he existed. And I don't think we can hammer home the point enough that, that's just not a hill to die on, because there is pretty much a historical consensus on it by not just Christians, it's agnostics and atheists, and there's lots of skeptics. The most skeptical Christians out there, the progressives, the Jesus Seminar and things of that nature, they can't avoid the truth of Christ being a real person, yet they're extremely skeptical. So they just strip all the supernatural component and say, it was a spiritual resurrection or, something of that nature. So, Mark,
I have the hero's journey whenever you're ready for that. I just have it down there. I can kind of talk through that.
yeah, absolutely. Go ahead.
My screen's being shared right now.
Oh,
pull it in, and I'll
let me bring that up. Since these other two are just going to hang out and take up screen space and not contribute any.
Yeah, I'm still here.
No, you're arguing with Dog on the side.
Not really. Just talking to him.
Dog just want to lay down. He's just laying down. He's just forming this master work that's just going to destroy me. Okay, so all right, so the hero's journey. So yes, you can apply a hero's journey template to Christ in multiple ways across the narrative of his life and across the micro stories that are in his life. So, for example, Christ has a call to adventure. This is baptism. Part of it's like him going to get baptized by John, right? And you can say like supernatural aid is his divinity as well. So you can kind of see this.
Hold on a second. Can you put that on full screen? You know how to do that on Chrome?
Like that?
Well, yeah, there you go. Sweet.
Okay, so he's being called to adventure because it's kind of his destiny, right? So like there's a call there. There is supernatural aid into bringing him into the world or something like that, or pointing him to John the Baptist. I mean, and I'm just using this as the example, right? And then from there, you begin to have the beginning of his transformation into the idea of the Messiah, right? Because he's really like, yes, we know he's the Messiah. We have an idea he's the Messiah, but he doesn't really become the Messiah, I think, until after he goes to the wilderness. Because the wilderness is also an allusion to 40 years in the desert with Exodus. So you have this challenges and temptations in the desert, right? Where the mentors and helping is pretty much something to the effect of, his own it's an internal fight. You have a revelation because he's being challenged by the devil. You have this revelation, a minor death and rebirth here to confirm, right, through transformation that he is Christ, like that he is the Messiah, because he turns down the devil 3 times, all the fun stuff. Then from there, you have a form of atonement in return, and this is where then he starts going out and preaching, and that is a hero's journey, fundamentally speaking. It follows the template across his life. I would say, the death and rebirth is fundamentally when he's crucified. That is that. He is transformed. He conquers death. And then atonement's interesting because he then is kind of required, he represents the atonement of man. So it also depends on what your perspective is and how you're looking at this. If you're looking at this from just a Jesus perspective, because there is very loosely a hero's journey here. But overall it does exist.
All right.
I don't know if that's enough. If that's enough empirical evidence for this type of discussion.
Yeah, that makes a pretty good case for possibly being a hero. So, speaking of from a mythology standpoint. So, yeah, it's I appreciate that definitely. And if you could shoot that link over to me, I'd like to.
Oh, I just Googled hero's journey. Heroes, literally, that's all that is.
Thank you. I thought you had some good source on that, and now we're just stuck here. It's
just an illustration of the hero's journey, man. That's all it is.
So, Mark, what are you and Dog arguing about? Y'all want to bring that to the forefront?
So it's not even so much that we're arguing. So Dog's just saying that that what we have right now is just a model of what we think fits our data on what history or what happened in history. And I was going to bring up what he said before, so we could probably talk about that. So when he says, when you look at the way historians analyze data, what they do is take a bunch of present data we have at the moment, like some ancient texts or whatever, and try to find a convincing story to make sense of the evidence using principles, say like the criterion of embarrassment or the principle of charity or the principle of parsimony or the criteria of dissimilarity, etc. My question is, how do we know that these criteria are truth tracking?
Yeah. So he's absolutely right. That's some of the methods that are used, and overall tradition. Now, here's the thing: is historians actually take different approach. There's what's called the philosophy of history, and there's it is not a settled argument on the best way to understand past historical events. And the first one in reading Mike Lincona's latest book on the resurrection, he makes it clear that one of the hardest things to do is to put aside a bias, because we all have biases. And one of the telltale signs of a historian that you may have issue with their conclusion is one who doesn't even admit that they have a bias, because everybody wants to be objective, but the truth of the matter is you really can't put history together without presuppositions. So we try to come up with the best theory that we can and try to eliminate those biases and presuppositions as much as possible. So a fair, side to the skeptics are, Christians absolutely want Christ and the resurrection to be true. Because our whole, basically our belief structure, identity, and everything rests on that. So it's really hard to take an unbiased approach, but in the same sense, there are naturalists who, not all naturalists, but there are naturalists who want with every grain of them for God to not be true. And so it's hard to check those biases when we do. So most historians usually take overall, their approach is the inference, the best explanation. Like Dog was talking about with parsimony. It's kind of like Occam's razor. We want the best hypothesis that accounts for most of the facts without compounding theories. So,
well, I think the issue you run into here is this, right? The only unbiased way to look at history is a timeline. That's it. Like, X event happened on X date. That is unbiased, fundamentally speaking. It is a fact. Now you're getting into, why things happen. So it's what versus why. And now, from the historical perspective, we always want to know why something happened. Well, that's where you have the interpretation problem.
Well, I'm actually basically giving you the explanation given by several historians. So
I'm familiar with some history, like philosophy of some. I'm not super familiar with it. But I would just say fucking Oz. Anyway, he's in the.
Oh, is Oz over there? Yeah, maybe.
So the issue here is if you want a non-biased account, you're only looking at the events, right? And that's the case, then guess what? Jesus most likely existed because we have primary source evidence that of someone named Jesus existing.
Right.
That's the what. That's the naturalistic best way to look at it. Right? Then when you start getting into why, right? Why maybe he existed or something like that, then you're running into issues because now you have to create a narrative, a story that is influenced by your own biases or framework or however we want to talk about this in order to determine why. So if, for example, two people can look at the same source, and this is so are you familiar with the work of I think it's Daniel Brown. The book's called Ordinary Men.
Yeah.
Right. So Ordinary Men, and then there's other guy who wrote on the same sources. His name is Hegel, last name Hegel. I don't remember exactly what. I think it's like Gold something. But anyway, they look at the exact same sources, right, of this Polish police battalion, and arrive at two very different conclusions.
Yeah.
Okay. So that being said, what is the underlying truth value? The battalion existed. These men and women existed. They did these things. But when you start asking why they did these things, you start applying presentism or historicism. And presentism is the idea of imposing your values on the past. Historicism is the idea of trying to understand the cultural context, but we can never truly understand the cultural context because we don't have enough primary sources or eyewitness interviews that actually answer those, like ask and answer those types of questions.
So my response to that would be, I understand what you're saying, and but in order to reconstruct the past, you can't just take, a chronological events. You can't just look at a timeline and say this time this time that, and that's the whole narrative itself plays a part in reconstructing who someone is. How we know that X existed in the past, what people at the time, how they, other writings that we have and things of that nature. All of this plays a part in, like I was saying, the inference to best explanation, which is the predominant approach by most historians, as they look at events that we have pretty good historical record of, and looking at these events and at the times, because the times we don't really have like real accurate, times of ancient events. We have kind of a span, where it happens. So we can't just say, chronologically at this time, this and that. We kind of have to look at the whole picture of it, the whole body of evidence that we have, and try to reconstruct who this figure is, based on the writings that we have. And all of that paints a picture of, to get to the inference of best explanation. And
that still answers, that's still getting at a why. There's a why factor there. Is that not an incorrect statement? Like, because when you're saying who this person is, you also have to understand why what their motivations are.
I think it's more of a what question than it is why. Because we can look at historical events, and look at the who and the what, and not really care about the why. So, and real quick, I wanted to address Dog's point that he had in a private chat. He had put over there about Occam's razor. No, Occam's razor is not something that we use to determine truth. Occam's razor is just part of the tool to shave off unnecessary ad hoc reasoning. So if we have to add a lot of things to make something work, the more that we add to it, the less likely that is the answer. So that's why Occam's razor, in my opinion, and obviously in science and a lot of places, is a very good tool to use, because we want to work with the most factual events that we have and try to reconstruct the past without adding a whole bunch of stuff to it. Which is why the inference to best explanation, in my opinion, is the best method. I do like Richard Carrier's approach of applying Bayesian probability, but I think that more or less addresses supernatural claims. I don't think that Bayesian probability is a real strong tool itself for determining, past historical figures and things of that nature. And that's why, a lot of historians really don't use that. Now, if we want to determine the truth of, supernatural claims or certain events that may or may not have happened, then I think Bayesian probability comes in, as a decent tool for that. I have heard people argue from Carrier's position, using probability to talk about the existence of characters. Well, Bayesian probability has a pretty significant flaw in it, and that is background knowledge. Almost nobody agrees on what background knowledge fits into it. So a naturalist could come and they could apply a probability of 0 of supernatural claims as their prior probability, and they'll come out that anything supernatural happening is not probable at all. Well, if you don't presuppose naturalism and say that, okay, if there was a God, you bring in the presupposition that a God may exist, well, then you've raised your prior probability significantly. And that affects the outcome of, the probability given Bayesian probability. So it's not, to me, that's like, we were talking before we even did this podcast, we were talking about Swinburne's probability of the resurrection was like 97%. Well, who's going to agree with the prior probabilities and the background knowledge? It's going to be an argument over that. So it's still just another area where people are going to disagree, like premises in an argument.
But that's not asking why. That's asking what is. So like maybe I'm missing something here. That's still like, so for example, if X event occurred and X event occurred and another event occurred and another event occurred and another event occurred, or we're just looking at events here. These are the is things, like based off of the standard. Then we look at it and go, the probability of this event occurring happened. That's still the Bayesian thing, right? It's still an is, but not a why.
Yeah. It's looking at just the probability of X occurring.
Okay.
So let's say that, like the example that I use, if you're a naturalist and you're bringing in the presupposition of naturalism, you would start with a prior probability of 0. So when you start with a prior probability of 0 and then you start adding in background knowledge and things of that nature, you're still not going to get over, I think it's 0.5 for the resurrection. I think it's going to be a pretty low probability. I don't think that can be applied to actual historical characters existing, though. And that's my thing is, because if we were going to do it by Bayesian probability and we look at, all of Paul's letters, the Gospels, the 7 or 8 outside sources that we have, and some of those are contentious. I mean, it's not certainty that those sources are talking about Jesus of Nazareth or, Jesus of the Bible. But if we were to say that, there are quite a few of them that are agreed upon that they are talking about Jesus of Nazareth. So we start adding those in, and your probability kind of goes up. Well, then the naturalists or those who are mythicists, or they'll take the prior probability and then they'll start dismissing things that aren't certain that it was written about Jesus, and then your probability's been lowered significantly. So that's why I think that the Bayesian probability is, in my opinion, is not a good way to determine past historical characters, or even, I would say you could make an argument to apply it to supernatural claims, but to just regular, mundane, ordinary, claims of places, people, things like that. I mean, you could take Bayesian probability and try to show me that you exist. What is the probability that you exist? Using Bayesian probability, and you're going to come out a lot of times with a really significant low number. So it's not a strong tool, in my opinion, to determine historical facts. Crazy, or what supernatural or naturalists would consider crazy claims, supernatural claims. Yeah, I mean, we could make an argument for that. So what are you laughing about? I got to see what you're laughing about. What's up, James Walton?
Just laugh.
Did he leave? Jesus is a fact. You got it, baby. We got a fan. So much self-delusion going on here. Yeah. And then I don't even know why I brought Mark and Dog. They've just been arguing and going at it in the private chat.
Okay. I was gonna say,
Now to
so
make them go into the main chat and hash
I'm
it.
gonna shut up for a little bit.
Yeah, this is the Dog and Mark show. So, let's hear what you got.
Well, I mean, Dog can't talk. I was gonna say, with Occam's razor, and hopefully he gets his mic on. How do we know it's truth seeking? It just if we look at an example, so like if we look at Richard Swinburne gives an example of a Kepler observing planets, right? And he sees this point in the sky, and then the next day he sees this point in the sky, and he makes up all these points in the sky, but never really sees a full circle. And then you would say, well, how do we know which one's the most likely explanation? Because between each one of those points, there could be an infinite amount of zigzags or something like that. But we want like the smoothest kind of simplest explanation, right? So that'd be an example. And then if we apply that to Jesus, we got all sorts of independent sources talking about the life of Jesus to say that they're all myths, or to say they're all making up a similar story just because. I don't know what reason there would be there. But if they were, then why would they all have the same story? And why would you multiply a bunch of people telling lies rather than just saying, well, they're probably telling the truth? And Dog said that's just begging the question, so we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, if you laid out a syllogism, we could look at it and see if maybe you're begging the question. But he didn't give an argument, Dog. He was giving an explanation. And I'm tired of you putting stuff in the chat and not coming on here and talking. You're wasting my screen space. Oh, man. That's funny because he's full of words every night. But tonight, for some reason, he can't access his microphone. Now, I heard female.
I haven't been charging this mic this whole time.
I heard a female yelling at him earlier. I think he done got in trouble by somebody in his house for talking too loud. Your mic died. What, is your mic on a battery by itself? Or how does that happen? How does your mic die?
Yeah, well, it's been dead for a couple hours now, Dog.
Yeah, I mean, you've had plenty of time to charge it. I think you're just copping out at this point.
Dog's scared.
Oh, man. So I did want to bring some sources and stuff for this topic, and being so impromptu and ADD as hell, I didn't actually get them together. So I hope everybody just takes our expertise and.
Oh yeah, how can we know the truth of the matter with these four people on the screen? One person doesn't even talk, and then the other, the other guy. I mean,
we don't even have our stuff together enough to.
Here's the question: do we all have pants on?
Yes, I have pants on. I do.
Yeah, right, Eddie.
Let's see. I don't know about Mark. Mark, when I saw the mustache he had the other night, he started to make me wonder if he ever wears pants while he's. Oh man, that's fun times. What are you drinking on, Mark? Are you drinking on like a spritzer or?
No, I'm not drinking anything.
You don't have any fluids at all?
Nope.
Well, that's why you're so skinny.
Oh, they don't drink water.
Yeah, you need to drink.
Not that skinny.
Water. No. I saw you for like 2 minutes, so I don't even remember what you look like. I just remember the mustache. That's it. And I thought you were going to bring so much more to this conversation, but yet you chose to argue with Dog in the chat the whole time. So
yeah, I mean, I don't know what else I was going to bring in.
We're on Discord. You're a freaking know-it-all. So I mean, I figured you had all of this.
Not really. I mostly focus on metaphysics, I guess.
Physics, really.
I tried to bring up a point whenever I had one, but you guys are talking pretty good, so it's like no need to get in the way.
So, well, it's getting late. I think we covered a lot of ground. I think we got to do this again, probably a little more prepared, and bring some sources and stuff like that. Because, Jim, I think you brought up some good points, and like we had talked in Discord. I mean, you and I, I'm more of a philosophical kind of guy. You got pretty good theological, and more of a formal education as far as historical topics and things of that nature. I mean, not
too.
you're a historian, but
I wouldn't go that crazy.
well, but yeah, but I don't even have any history classes in formal education. So what I know is what I read online, and being in, you just can't cover all subjects. It's just
No,
too
you
many
can't.
of them out there. So my main focus is philosophy, and theology kind of bleeds into that, but it's mostly philosophy. So I get a little bit of overview of history, here and there. You just can't talk about a historical figure without reading about history. So next time, I promise we will bring some sources, and we'll do it in a more of a balanced way, because I want to bring some that are pro mythicism, and some that and others that are.
Well, there's an idea that we can play with. I think maybe briefly, and I guess what I would say is, so it's funny that you kind of talked about like we talked about legends earlier and stuff like that. So there's probably an argument that can be made that like which Jesus are you talking about? And I think there's a strong argument there. Like that's a serious argument when you start talking about like Jesus. Was it common name? If it was common, which Jesus are you talking about? Who? I think who is it? Captain Dadpool came up with like 4 people who's like, this is Jesus, and they all came in different centuries, like but within the same time frame, which is interesting. So it's within the same time frame, but it's just like it's a collection of things, and so like you can say the same thing occurred in like Viking history, right? Like the legend, like a legend of Ragnar Lothbrok, or the way the History Channel portrays him in the show Vikings. It's not actually like that person. It's a collection of different people that are representative of one person.
Yeah.
And I think there's an interesting argument to be had there. But I don't know if it completely undermines the Christian faith in that regard, because at what point can we truly prove and be certain, right? Because like the truth of the matter, like the absolute truth here, or at the whatever, that this is Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
But I don't know if it makes it a myth.
Yeah, I would. Matter of fact, when we get ready to, the next one, we're going to come back to this, and we're going to be, this was just kind of impromptu because of the last, couple nights conversation, and just, talk about a few things, just have an open discussion. But I'd like to do this again. And I'd like to, for everybody to kind of focus on, their area of interest the most. And if you don't mind, Jim, I'd like for you to, if you have time, kind of spend a little bit of time in the mythology and legend and how that adds up to, these accusations of Christ being mythology or legend.
Well, I think that's the argument I just made actually makes more sense from the mythology perspective.
Well,
it's the collection of people representative as one.
I mean, so we can do like a deeper dive on it and really evaluate.
Yeah, I would bring Captain Deadpool on then, because I think he has the historical knowledge that I just don't have. He wants to bring that historical knowledge in and look at it from each individual person or each individual type of entity. Then that's a I won't say a convincing argument, but it's an argument.
Yeah, definitely. I'd like to spend a little more time on that aspect. And address Oz's claim there's no evidence. It's anonymously written text that are copied of copies of copies. That's I love Yaz, but that's one of the oldest um, mythicist position that's been answered several times. So I'd definitely like to address, some of the actual claims by mythicists. I'd like to look at it from the mythological legendary status. Um,
I wonder if what makes it a myth is the fact that it's oral history, or the oral transference is what is a key component to making it myth. And the reason why I would say that is because Homer's epics do the same thing. Most myths were before we can write things down, were translated that way. I mean, unless, or like maybe one person writes it down, but we get most of those myths from people who are just sharing this through oral histories.
yeah,
So I wonder if that's a key component to what we talk about as myth.
that'd definitely be something we can look into. But then, if that was the case, I mean, almost all of ancient society was oral societies.
That's the problem.
Yeah, so we would have to look at what's actually myth and what's not in the criteria for myth, and why certain things are considered myth or not, because
Yeah.
that's one of the things of it, you hear, well, why didn't they write about it until sometimes they'll even concede the earliest dating, in the 50s.
Yeah.
Well, why didn't they write about it until 20 years later? Well, that's because your common everyday people weren't literate, and that's not who Christ came to be with. He came to be with the common everyday people, the poorest of the poor, the worst of the worst, the hurting, so it made no sense. There's actually a twofold answer to that. One is, they thought he was the Messiah of the Old Testament. Why write anything down when, he's fixing to overthrow the Roman occupation and things of that nature? Because that's why they kept, rebuking him when he said he had to die, and things that, when Peter rebuked him and things of that nature, because they thought he was going to overthrow the Roman government and start his leadership there and build the kingdom there. So when you put that component in it, I mean, why would you write anything about, the guy who's fixing to reign? It just makes no sense. Second of all, the people that he walked amongst, and the people that Paul witnessed to and the whole church witnessed to, were common folk, and they weren't literate. Only the only learned, literate people were the affluent, So it only makes sense that they wouldn't have written it down, because who's going to read it? There's not.
I mean, there's a myriad of factors that goes into the oral. I guess we can call it oral history or oral narrative, or any number of things, because of like so many different variables. Like you
Right.
can, I think, like the conflict amongst the church, like who's doing this right, who's not doing this right, what's the survival of the fittest, right?
Yeah,
Just because what is it? Just because we don't have the fossil record doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
yeah,
Something like that.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, like what I would sit there and say and respond with,
So
huh?
I said, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence.
Yeah. And so then what I would also sit there and say is, if that's the case, then we can't trust Plato. We can't trust Plato's stuff at all, because that was destroyed during the Dark Ages, and the only reason why we were able to recover that was because of trade with the Venetian, like through the Italian Renaissance and the Crusades. So people say how bad the Crusades were. Well, if that's the case, the Crusades were bad, yes, but they're also really good, because now we have exposure to Plato, because the Muslim world is who preserved it.
Yeah, absolutely. And when that's one of the pushbacks on it, is the consistency argument. If
Yeah.
we're for the amount of evidence that we do have for Christ, if you deny that, then you pretty much have to deny all kinds of ancient historical figures. And but going back to the writing thing, and so they would ask, well, if it was a common folk, then why did they write it down later? Well, because he ended up dying, which they didn't expect, and something happened after he died to make them continue on the church. They had no reason to. They were devastated because he had died, but something had happened that reignited their mission, and what they were supposed to do. And so once it did start to spread, and it did spread to the affluent, then there was a reason to write it down, because now the affluent who read and write, they need to hear the message. So there's all kinds of significant, accurate hypothesis of why it was written afterwards, and that makes total sense, and it's not ad hoc. It's actual. There's good reasons why it would have been written afterwards and not at the time, and those are some things I'd like to spend a little more time on discussing too. There's a lot of factors that people don't take into account. One is we have an unbroken chain of bishops and church fathers, from the apostles. You can go to the Catholic website now, and they have a chain of bishops all the way back until the apostles. So it's not like there was this huge gap and then all of a sudden people just started believing in Jesus. I mean, there's literally a chain that, from the time of Jesus all the way until now. We have
then the question you have to sit there and use is how is that relevant to the truth claim? Again, so then it comes back to this idea of relevancy.
Well, yeah, but it's relevant to the truth claim because when you have no gap in the chain of evidence, it goes all the way back to the time of the person. That just lends a ton of credence to the fact that the person existed. Again, we're not debating whether he was supernatural or did supernatural things. It's just his existence.
We're just talking about his pure existence. I agree with you. Like
when we have people who were alive at that time who had every reason to reject that Christ was alive, they could have had plenty of detractors or plenty of people who said, no, here's the evidence he wasn't around, things of that nature. And something else that they forget is, we have, there's a lot of non-biblical sources that usually isn't considered because they're part of the church chain and things of that nature. We've got Pliny the Younger, and then we've got
and that's the outside corroborative evidence that supports it. Yeah.
We have direct understudies of the apostles. It's so there's a far greater body of evidence for the historical Jesus that than just the few that are usually cited outside the Bible or the Bible itself. I mean,
just because it's only a paragraph long doesn't mean it's not important.
Absolutely. Especially when it's in writings that they really had no reason to mention him, unless it was a significant person that did something,
Well, I mean, in some ways it was like, the idea that Christ, this, like, what was it? I think it was, I don't want to give out the wrong name. I don't want to say Tacitus, but I don't think that's right.
No, Tacitus was the one that wrote about it.
So it's like, here's this guy, like, it's like, here's a prophet that's there. Oh, fun fact, Vespasian, Titus, and a few other Roman emperors are invading Jerusalem because of this other, again, probably because of this prophet, at some level, because it's in direct, challenging of the king, and they're forming this religion, and they don't quite understand. Like, the Romans saw the Christian religion as very foreign in a lot of ways, just like many people see it as very foreign today, because, oh my God, you're drinking the blood and the body, and you're eating the body and drinking the blood of Christ. Like, that's a pretty grotesque thing to think about. Like, let's be honest.
Yeah, absolutely. That's kind of off subject why I'm not Catholic, because this whole idea of
Eucharist it doesn't taste like the body, I promise.
Yeah,
and it's great, and it's either grape juice or wine. It's okay.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing: is how much of Jesus's body is there to go around? I mean,
enough to go around forever.
Yeah, it's like, okay, if we're continuing to eat the body of Christ, and then this priest has the power to, infuse this Eucharist with the actual, it's
the anointment. It's a symbol. I mean, really, it's a symbol. It's a symbol.
You can't say a symbol if you're Catholic. It's they would burn you at the stake.
It's a symbolic ritual, just like Confucius believed in rituals, right?
Yeah,
like Confucius. Well, it is like. So here's the thing: like rituals, and they give this idea of sacredness and of realness to something. So even though it's not the real body and blood of Christ, like like it's what it represents and the symbolism that it represents it's supposed to, what is it, transform into that. Now, granted, it doesn't actually do that, but the same ideas can be applied to the rituals of the Chinese court and stuff like that. Well, this is a real ritual in which we need to, before our what is it, tea, like tea and tea making in China is very like ritualistic, like very ritualistic.
How familiar are you with the Catholic Catechism?
The name sounds familiar.
Okay. In Catholicism, it is absolutely heretical to say it's a symbol.
Yeah, I mean
it's are you familiar with I think it's transducianism,
transubstantiation or something like that?
Transubstantiation, that's it.
Yeah. Substantiation.
Yeah. So you have to literally believe you are eating the body of Christ.
Well,
drinking, it's not a symbol. It's a sacrament, and it's a way that God infuses grace.
I'm with you. Like I agree with you. Like I'm with you. Like I support everything that you say.
No. I thought
there's two things here. There's two different ways that we're interpreting this, like, or two different ways that we could be interpreting this. And like what I would say is, there's one's the Catholic way, which is within the doctrine and the beliefs, right? Which is which is what they believe, and it's subjective, right? And then there's this objective portion, right? Which is like we're outside looking in, going, "Oh, it's a ritual, it's a symbol, it's
I'm a
part of this."
I was just where you're coming from. I thought you were saying even for Catholics it was a symbol, and I'm like,
no. I wouldn't say that. But I mean, I'm speaking objectively.
Yeah, I love my Catholic brethren, but that's just one weird. I am not getting onto that. I can't get down with that. I just that's too weird for me. And I was even going to, I even thought about Eastern Orthodox, and then it's the whole liturgical service itself, But there's some mysticism in Eastern Orthodox too, like when the priest comes through the crowd, they touch his robe to put their prayers and things onto his robe. And I'm just like, what? Why can't you just stop all that mess? Let's, I could get down with the liturgical service if we're not going to put all this mysticism in there, and it's one of those tradition things.
There's nothing wrong with traditions at some level and some rituals or something like that. Like it does help you. It does help add gravitas maybe to what's going on. So, for example, like I guarantee, this is speculation because I'm not very familiar with Orthodoxy. So, like for example, like the one way I would make sense of this, touching the robe and placing your prayers and like in the robe, is the same thing as the person who touched Jesus Christ, and Christ then turns around and says you're healed or something like that. Like it's the same concept. It's the same like ritualistic idea that or transubstantiation of that idea, just putting into a practice so that way we can act it out.
Right. Yeah.
And as we act it out, we actually experience the idea maybe that, hey, I'm putting my prayer forward and now I'm being heard by God. Yeah. I know it now. The atheists would probably really have a load of fun with all that, but it's a pattern. It's something that it pulls you out of your everyday cycle and puts you into a transformative cycle.
Well, that's a good segue into my show Tuesday. I'm going to have the atheist troll on.
Oh man, have fun with that one.
He's a former Catholic. So we're going to have some fun at the expense of our Catholic brethren. And it's so now you and I have talked about this before. One of the greatest things that ever happened to the church was the Reformation. One of the worst things that happened was the Reformation, because we lost that authority on, scripture, on how to interpret scripture and things. That's how we have so many, such a fracturing of the church now, which a lot of people need to understand that most denominations, there is no disagreement in the core doctrine. It's only how to conduct church service. or what should be allowed. That's the major difference in most.
Well, it's what's relevant to those people. It's a relevancy thing.
What do you
I
mean?
know. I'm hung on relevancy.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm hung on.
No, it's really, when it boils down to it, it's how to do church. It's spiritual.
Mhm.
It's things of that nature. There is no disagreement on the core doctrine, and that's something I think that needs to be repeated at every chance that we get. Because a lot of people like to use the multiple denominations as like it's some kind of defeater for Christianity or something. But when it boils down to it, there's very few denominations that disagree with the core, and most of them are your fringe, like, Jehovah's Witnesses and oneness Pentecostals and things like that. For the most part, evangelical churches, which is it is the mass majority in the North America, all agree on the core doctrine. So, it's anytime I hear people say, well, what do you know, 1,000 denominations, which one? It doesn't matter. It's what you believe, and spiritual gifts and how to conduct church depends on the denomination you go to. It's all, saved by grace through faith. Christ is, physical bodily resurrection, Son of God, all of that's the core doctrines there. So it's really not a defeater, and really getting tired of hearing it. But anyway, yeah, I think we're gonna have some fun with Jeff. You need to be on standby, so we can have some trolling to do with Jeff. Give him a little bit of his trolling medicine back.
I don't know if I could do that. I'm not a very good troll, and I'm not a very good debater.
Hey, I'm not going to put out there what I said on TikTok, but when I first got into TikTok, my first attempt at trolling, it backfired massively. It was horrible. It was what I'd said was very insensitive. And I'll tell you in private what it was, but I got hammered, and I actually had to issue an apology for my trolling, because I was like, bro, this is why I don't troll, because I'm not good at it. Yeah. And sometimes I tend to fall over to the dark humor side, and it doesn't go over very well for people who don't, understand my position. But it was funny. It was funny. It was a learning lesson for me, and I'll stick to not trolling. So, well, you know what? I would say I appreciate Mark and Dog joining us, but they pretty much didn't do anything.
Yeah, I've been in the YouTube chat and this other chat talking Dog, so yeah. I would be talking more if Dog was actually talking.
I brought you on to actually talk with your voice and not.
Okay. Yeah, well, I'm talking to people in the chat, but what am I gonna add, right?
Yeah, you can add a lot. It's
smart, dude.
Yeah, it's you're not a dummy, and we're not spring chickens, so our minds don't work as fast as they used to. That's what we need you here for.
I'm just talking to Oz in the chat for the most part.
There's this. I think this conversation gets very complex very quickly for no really good reason.
Yeah.
And I think part of what's going in the chat there too, like, oh, because this person is anonymous that wrote X document. I'm going, okay, man, like,
yeah, that's just ignorance of how the historical method and sources of things are. Oz, please, let me tell you, son. Hold on a second. I'll let you finish. Oz, listen to me and listen to me carefully, okay? The copies of copies of copies. That was put to rest when we found the Dead Sea Scrolls. Okay, it was almost word for word, except for dialect. There was only a difference in dialect. It confirmed almost. We have over 5,000 manuscripts from different areas all around the Middle East at different times, and none of them contradict each other. The only difference is in dialect. That's it. Mm-hmm. And so the fact that it's copies of copies of copies doesn't mean anything, especially once one knows how important accuracy was for scribes and for the oral society then. They used to memorize books worth of information because that was the only way they had to pass on their culture and traditions. So it's not like us today. They want to, liken it to the telephone game, but that's just not how the society was then. all of their tradition, all of their history, all of their culture was transmitted orally. So they had to be very accurate with what they transmitted. Otherwise, they couldn't have a an accurate account of their history. Because um, I mean that's just the way it was. It just wasn't much writing down. But Jim, you want to say something?
I had like a little brain thing, but I think Mark has something you want to say.
Yeah, I was gonna say Daniel Wallace and N.T. Wright specifically. They talk about sure, let's say John, for example. We have copies of copies of copies for John. But when we see this, it's not just one line of copies. There are multiple copies for the same sort of thing. So we'll have 3 copies in one layer and then 5 in the other layer. And we can look to see what those texts say. And then where there's a blank in one or a mistake in one, you can look towards the other 4 or 5 that you have and then fill in that blank using the documents that we have. So we can still analyze them a little bit, right?
Yeah, and I mean and a perfect example of that would be the King James. We had a very accurate rendition of the early manuscripts with the King James until we found earlier manuscripts. And when we found those manuscripts, they were almost exactly the same, except for a few. There was a couple additions to it, but it wasn't any additions that changed the message. As a matter of fact, they fit along perfect with the message, which is why they thought that it was part of the original message, because it fit right into it and it didn't change anything. And once you look at the older manuscripts and you take those additions out of it, I mean, it's almost exactly word for word what they already had. So every time we find more manuscripts, older manuscripts, and in different areas, never once have we found manuscripts that contradicts anything that's written in the New Testament. And we're talking about from different areas. We're not even talking about, the same geographical area. This is different sources. This is different, church lines or lines of missionaries, things of that nature from that time. And they all agree almost at like 99%, except for dialect. That's the only difference that's, ever found in any copies that we've ever found.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, I was laughing a little bit during that thing because I was just thinking like the copies of copies of copies thing. So I'm thinking, okay, so what's the best method here? Like, do you just want 5,000 people who are all sitting there watching Jesus or whatever, and all 5,000 people to copy down what he says, and that adds, or is it like? Because fundamentally speaking, it doesn't make any sense, because like you sit there and like we all copy things. So like even those 5,000 people could have a different vantage, a different perspective that could change the meaning of something. Or even then you sit there and you go like, well, here's the copy of X. And now you have, like I write, because people dictated and then people wrote, most likely. It's kind of probably what happened. Even if they didn't, they wrote it out. So like, here's my copy. I go to the copy machine, which is, oh, by the way, 5,000 other people who are going to copy the exact same document that I have.
Yeah.
So I don't quite understand like what's your definition of your primary source here.
So is the New Testament has been preserved in more manuscripts than any other ancient work of literature. There's over 5,800 complete or fragmented Greek manuscripts cataloged, 10,000 Latin manuscripts, and 9,300 manuscripts in various other ancient languages, including Syriac, Slavic, Gothic, Ethiopic, Coptic, and Armenian. The dates of the manuscripts are from 125 to 15th century Germany. And every single copy that we have over that 1,400 year span has no differences other than dialect. I mean, that's phenomenal. That is, given ancient documents, that is phenomenal.
No, it's most complete. Like, we don't even have complete Norse mythology. Like, I mean, we don't. Like, we think we do, but the Edda that's it. Like, that's really it. That's what what derives most of our understanding of Norse mythology.
Right.
And that's just an example. Greek mythology, there's more, but it doesn't have a narrative to it, really.
Yeah,
it is derived mostly from Homer.
Yeah,
shit, I forgot about that. It is derived mostly from Homer.
Well, and other than his writings, we don't have anything that Homer existed.
Oh yeah, like that totally. Like people think that Homer doesn't exist at some level. I mean, they make a good argument that he could be a representative of several people, just like I mentioned earlier, like a legend.
Right.
So,
and I'd also like to say, like, with the writings being put way after, a lot of these people may have had to go find scribes, right? So some people think that Peter used Mark as a scribe, for example. So during that time, Peter, some think it was the mentor of Mark in Rome. So many, think that Mark wasn't an eyewitness. So Peter would have been the one that gave Mark his information, right? So yeah.
Well, and I mean, that's where textual criticism comes in. Because even though, let's say, the earliest copies we have were 1st century, 2nd century, you can look at the body of evidence that's there and see that there are the narratives, the contemporary narratives or language that it's written in, the places that it's written about. That's why I said there's actually a really good argument that the whole New Testament was completed before the destruction of the temple in 70 AD, because you have no mention whatsoever of the worst atrocity of the Jewish people in all of Jewish history. I mean, when you look at what happened at the destruction of the temple in 70 AD.
Yeah, that was Vespasian.
Do what?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I just thought out loud. That was Vespasian, the Emperor Vespasian.
Yeah, they barricaded the city and didn't let them in. They literally starved them to death. I mean, it was just atrocious what had happened to the Jewish people when at the siege, and then the ultimate destruction. So the fact, like that would be like writing a narrative about the United States and never mention 9/11. It makes no sense whatsoever that would not. In fact, they would have used the opportunity to say, hey, Jesus prophesied that the temple would be destroyed. And look, it was destroyed if it was written after it happened. And there's not one single mention of Jesus fulfilling the prophecy of destroying the temple. And so it makes no sense whatsoever why they would write any of the New Testament that we have without mentioning the worst thing that's ever happened to the Jews, especially in that modern time, and not hammering home that Jesus was had prophesied. I mean, that's, if you want people to believe he's the Messiah, you would have taken every opportunity you could to show that he prophesied something happening. And then it happened. So, I mean, it makes no sense that we don't have any mention of that, of Jesus's prophecy being fulfilled or the temple being destroyed. And then when you look at the book of Revelation, he's clearly talking about, the Roman Empire and Nero. When he talks about the number of the beast, the 666, it's actually art form that the Jews used, not just the Jews, but in Hebrew, they would, correlate the words with numbers or letters with numbers. And when you decipher the 666, it comes out perfect to Nero, and then, so if you look at Jesus's warnings of the tribulation that's coming, I mean, it fits exactly the destruction of the temple in 70 AD. Then you look at Revelation, and a lot of Revelation, you can, absolutely deduce from that they're talking about the Roman Empire. And obviously he couldn't talk about them out blatantly if they were still in charge at the time. And he was on the island of Patmos. He was already banished to Patmos. So he couldn't come out and say it's Nero Caesar. And he specifically says, with wisdom, you can know who the beast and the number of the 666 is. Well, if he's talking to a contemporary audience, why would he be talking to a 21st century audience and say, with wisdom, you can know this? Because he's speaking in code and he's using the art form where they, change the letters to numbers. And it just clearly, when you have this understanding of, apocalyptic literature and the Jewish styles at that time of literature and things of this nature, you can very well see that he's warning of, the Roman Empire, Nero, and what's going on. So you take all of this into context, and there's just absolutely no reason whatsoever to believe that any of it was written after the destruction of the temple. I just don't see, how or why they even come to that conclusion, because they have in the past, they even had a higher, they for a long time they thought it was in the 2nd century that a lot of these were written. And the more knowledge that we get through archaeology and then textual criticism and of the culture and the languages used and all of these different things, they have steadily moved the timing down. And I'm not talking about just Christian scholars. I'm talking about biblical scholars overall, so there's even good arguments for Paul's letters being written as early as, I think it was 54. There's some arguments for Mark being written in the 50s. So the more knowledge that we gain on it, the more we understand, about when it was written. And there's so many different, again, using textual criticism, there's so many things within the documents themselves, traditions, that predate the supposed writing of them, things of that nature. So I think if we take a completely objective, approach to it, which there are quite a few biblical scholars that are, agnostic. There's a lot more than there were in the past. And even at the latest dating, I mean, we still have late 1st century, which is phenomenally early considering most ancient sources that we have. Buddha was written about 1,000 years after Buddha. We look at all these other religions that have these writings, and almost none of them have contemporary writings. And then when people talk about, primary sources, tell me a primary source for just about any figure in ancient history. I mean, it's almost unheard of. And just because something's not,
you do have them, but they're in the circles, like the educated circles. So like we can without a doubt talk about Roman emperors, for example. Like we know when they existed.
Yeah.
Like we have, like we can say yes to them. Now the question becomes, and we have a good chain of custody for them, like as far as the history is concerned. But to say, this person lived here, for example, that gets dicey, because you're moving yourself so far away from, I guess, I don't want to say the power base, but from like where people are writing in the ancient world, then it just doesn't work very well.
He fell asleep, so I'm just going to move him off the screen.
Yeah. And so there's that. And I guess what I would also say is, by the way, I was wrong. For some reason, I was hung on Vespasian, which came of several decades after Nero. But yeah, Nero was around 68 to something like 68 Common Era or 80.
Well, it sounded good, so I just kind of
yeah. Vespasian did. I mean, the Jewish state was in revolt for a very long time.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Like I mean, when you burned out, like the people that were left were like, no, we're not playing this game anymore. Like, I mean, they still were revolting against the Roman Empire for quite some time, through implicit and explicit means. So I mean, overall, like, history is one of those things that the further further away you get from something, like from something happening. So like yesterday, yes, we have some precision of what happened yesterday. A week ago, we have some precision of what happened a week ago. So like accuracy and precision kind of start to begin to generate over time. So like a month, I don't remember what I did on December 1st, for example, at X time. And that's fundamentally the problem you're running in history. So you also have to look at it in time, like in like little time blocks. And if this comes up in this time block, okay, so we see something occurring here. We may not have an exact date, or we have a source that points here, or a source that points here, or a source that points here. Like we still have some validity or some soundness to this that says, hey, something happened here. And to get back to, I guess, to like a crux of this argument, something happened here, and Jesus was here. Like someone named Jesus fundamentally existed. Yeah. Whether or not he was resurrected is completely a moot point. It's he lived and he died.
And that's an important factor to the whole thing is, we had, like we started the show with, you have to separate the supernatural Jesus from the historical Jesus. And that is, I think that's where a lot of people, they kind of conflate the two. They think, I don't know if they think but they approach it as if, they give in to the historical Jesus, they got to give in to the supernatural claims, which they absolutely don't. That's a different argument for a different day. That's just establishing the historicity of something is not granting every historical fact written about them. That's actually a hallmark of ancient history is there's often, legendary things written about ancient figures. They were real people, but there's, a lot of quite a bit of embellishment and things of that nature. We can address that in a different conversation, whether, these things really happened or they could happen or there was embellishment or, legendary or something mythological added to it or things of that nature. But that is a totally different conversation, and I think that's where a lot of this kind of gets, convoluted because I think there is this, maybe this subconscious driven, reasoning for denying Christ is because it's almost like you have to concede that he did these supernatural things, and you absolutely don't. And I think we've made that clear several times, throughout the broadcast that there's progressive Christians who deny anything supernatural happening in Christ's life. There's non-progressive Christians that hang on that side and think, Paul didn't, or that the resurrection was just a spiritual thing. It wasn't even a physical thing, so, and those are conversations that we can have. But at the bare minimum, bare bones, there's no evidence for Christ. It's just an absolute ridiculous claim.
I would just like to say, because I like to look at everything philosophically, kind of thing, right? So this is just the four criterion of what theory is most likely to be true. Now, if we're not talking about the resurrection, let's just apply this to, did Jesus exist, right? A claim towards a theory is most likely to be true if it leads us to expect varied events which we observe, right? So we saw the explosion of the church, right? The letters, we see writings from that time. 2 would be what's proposed is simple. It's a guy living. 3, it fits well with our background knowledge. I mean, I guess the historicity would be the background knowledge kind of thing. Now, if you were arguing Jesus was God, you could say it fits well within our background knowledge of, let's say, the Old Testament. And then 4, there's no rival explanation that explains 1 through 3 as well as this. I think that's the knockout one. How are you going to explain all these writings and the explosion of the church and such without in a better way than just saying Jesus existed, right? I don't think that it's a good rival in any sense.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. That's there are a lot of facts to account for. It's not just the writings and when they were written. It's like I'd said, the apostles had every predisposition to not follow Christ.
Mhm.
When Christ died, they had every reason to just stop. There was no reason to continue because the Jewish Messiah was not supposed to die, and that's what Peter was like, when you're with, they were arguing over who's going to sit at the right hand, and then Peter rebuked Jesus because Jesus said he had to die. And then Peter was like, no, you're not going to die. And Jesus rebuked him for trying to thwart God's plan. So the Garden of Gethsemane, when they try, when Peter cut the ear off of the soldier and they tried to prevent him from arresting Jesus and all that, they still didn't understand what Jesus meant. And Jesus got really, really aggravated with them, and said, how long do I have to be with you? Kind of in this just fed up kind of tone, because he had made it extremely clear to them, what was going to happen and what had to happen, but they were so earthly mind. They had their mind on earth, the earthly reign so much, they refused to believe that he was going to die and not set up his kingdom there. And, because it was totally against Jewish theology. Most Jews were messianic, but not all Jews were messianic. Not all Jews believe in a resurrection. Not all Jews believed in the afterlife. None of them believed in a resurrection of the Messiah, because the idea of resurrection to Old Testament Jews was that at the end of time, at the last days is when there was a resurrection, and it was all the people that was going to be resurrected, not just one person. So they didn't understand this whole concept of Jesus. That's why they wept. That's why they were so upset that he had died, and they put him in this tomb, and then they all gathered in this house afterwards. And, they were just, and Thomas was like, I'm not going to believe it's Jesus unless I can feel the wounds, because they had no idea of the Messiah dying and resurrecting. That was just not part of their plan, which actually counts against the hallucination theory, because you don't have hallucinations about things that you aren't, ideas you aren't cognizant of. So you don't have hallucinations about things that aren't in your mind going on. You hallucinate things you're familiar with. Well, they had no idea whatsoever, no expectation of him being resurrected. There's no reason for him to hallucinate him. The whole mission was over and done with. That was it. It was over. He died. Their follower had died. They were torn because something convinced them he was the Messiah, but he's dead. And so, which is like, why in the world would they pick up again and go and eventually have this message spread around the world? Like you were talking about the growth of the church, they must have seen something, and for it to be just first of all, to have a group hallucination really doesn't make any sense. I mean, there are times in history that it appears that groups have had hallucinations, but never has there been a hallucination of an idea that they didn't have, that they weren't predisposed to. So when they didn't even have this idea of a Messiah dying and resurrecting, they had no reason to have a hallucination about it. It doesn't make any sense to have a hallucination about something that you didn't even know existed or happened. So they had, like I said, they had every reason to just stop. There was no reason whatsoever to carry on the message, to do this, that, or the other, unless they were all convinced that they saw him after he died, and that's, that gets into the resurrection talk, which is, not what we were really addressing, but the fact that that they went on and spread this message. And like I said, we have the unbroken chain of bishops and churches, and it's not just one church. We're talking about, there was a church in Syria, there was a church in Ethiopia, there were different churches who thought they were the original church. So it's kind of like a spider web chain. We have history that goes all the way back, and they argue over who was actually the apostles, which apostle they followed, whether it was, Peter or later on Paul or this, that, or the other. And they argue over, who was the original church, so, but this chain still goes all the way back to the followers of Christ. So it's, a lot of people think that there's like this huge gap in history and all of a sudden somebody picks it up and they're like, oh yeah, Jesus, this is Christianity. This is what we're going to do. But there are so many places and areas that it could be falsified, that wasn't falsified. And there wasn't, people who come out and wrote against this movement and things of this nature on the mass scale that it was. I mean, even Paul was like, when he was talking about the things that he saw and experienced, he's like, you can go ask these people. So he was talking about something that happened at the time that people could have combated what he said. But, so it's not like he was so far removed from it that, hey, you got to take my word for it. He was saying, yeah, hey, go ask these people. There's people over here that saw it, so there were so many things there that could have falsified the whole message. There's so many things there that could have stopped them from going on and spreading this message. They had no reason to do it, unless they really were convinced that they saw him after he died.
I think the big thing here as well is don't change your argument. Don't move the goalpost. And which is the goalpost is, was he real or not?
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
And when you sit there and change it to, well, was he the son of God? Different argument altogether. So stop trying to change the goalpost. We're trying to have an argument about whether or not he existed. And I think there's plenty of strong evidence that supports that he existed in the framework that science would provide. Science and history would provide.
Right. I agree completely.
That's good. Anyway, great. It's great.
I wanted to look at this one claim that Oz just made.
Yeah. There's no physical archaeological evidence. The Savior of the world has nothing but written accounts passed through oral tradition.
Well, that's assuming that the written accounts aren't reliable. Let's see.
There was a meme, and it was an atheist in court, and it was hey, 6 girls testified that you sexually assaulted them, and he's like, well, testimony isn't evidence, right? So it's like, well, how much testimony do you need? Sure, it might not always be perfectly reliable, right? You can look to see if they have any motives or
right?
But
I don't like the comparisons with our justice system, because our justice system is designed to allow guilty people to go free before it locks up somebody that's innocent.
Yeah, that's not really a discussion, though, right?
Yeah, it's our justice system is not a good analogy to judging evidence.
It was just a meme.
Yeah, that is actually
testimony isn't evidence.
Yeah, that is actually a supposed defeater that I've heard. Some type of rebut to it, and I'm like, wait a minute, do you understand how the justice system works?
Yeah, it's not a defeater. It's just
it's not to make sure we get all the guilty.
Well, so here's something that I would say to that. Again, no evidence for. Okay, you're changing the goalpost, Oz. Like, you straight up just changed the goalpost. Like, I literally just said, like we're not changing the goalpost. We're just establishing if Jesus was real. And you sit there and it says, again, no evidence for a human being being divine. For human being divine.
So, are you not a mythicist anymore? That's good.
Is Christ real? Is the character? Is this guy a human being? Real or not? Yes.
Yeah, and
no?
the archaeological evidence, I'm pretty sure, and this is actually a very controversial part of the case for Jesus. But there's a stone, and correct me if I'm wrong, but a gravestone that says James, brother of Jesus, right? And that's a usual thing. They would put names of family members or people they would be correlated with on the gravestone, and usually it would be like a parent or something like that, but Jesus would have been the most known one in the family, and they would have put that on the stone. But lots of people say that is forged or fake, but I still don't believe that it's you need archaeological evidence per
Well, I
se,
mean,
right?
how do you define archaeological evidence? You know,
Yeah.
pottery is not evidence. I mean, like,
Well, we have
pottery
tons.
is evidence of things, but like okay, like it only gets you so far to say, okay, well, this person did this. Well, if that's the case, then if we have pottery of depictions of Achilles and Hector, are they not real? I mean, like, does that establish like what is the archaeological evidence you're trying to establish,
Yeah.
and what's the relevancy to the argument?
Well, not only that. I mean, there's tons of archaeological evidence that supports, um, the historical reliability of the New Testament. And that's, I mean, when you start building this picture of every historical or archaeological thing we find only confirms things in the Bible or the New Testament, and none of them contradict it. You're starting to build the picture that, it's pretty accurate and reliable, which is one of the reasons that historians accept the narrative, because we have so much archaeological evidence, all the places that we didn't think existed. And over the last 10 years, what they found in archaeology, the Pool of Siloam and,
I mean, even Nazareth, right?
yeah, that's just it. We found more. I just saw an article a second ago from one of the science magazines that was talking about how much we've learned about Nazareth from archaeological evidence. The city was a lot bigger than what had been expected, and or
A lot
what
of people even said it was fake, right?
yeah, exactly.
There's no evidence.
And we're constantly finding archaeological evidence that all it does is confirm things that are talking. Now, we're not talking about confirming supernatural things, but we're talking about confirming people, places, and things and events that the Bible or New Testament talks about. So yeah, everybody thinks that there's somehow that absence of evidence is evidence of absence. That.
If that's the case, then you have to I think James Walton brought up a good point. Then it turns into the evolution argument. Well, just because I don't see this particular fossil record doesn't mean that this thing didn't exist. I mean, like, there's something that happened between this point, and we know that fossils don't, not all bones become fossils, because there's a process that occurs there. So, like, again, there's this idea here. What do you define as archaeological evidence? Are you looking for, like, Jesus's bones, for example?
Right.
Okay, well, that's probably not going to happen.
Find me
Even
anyone.
if he didn't resurrect,
right?
huh?
Especially if he resurrected. I mean,
if he resurrected, yes, like that would be that. I think that would be an argument for the resurrection. However, I think we would have to first establish that most people, humans, live a life and then they die and then become bones, right? Or they become fossilized. And if they become fossilized, then, like, there's some stuff there that I think would have to happen in order to go down that road. But I mean, just to say that Christ was potentially a real person or is a real person doesn't require the bones of the damn man.
Yeah.
I would ask what kind of evidence, archaeological evidence, you'd want, right? Like, was Jesus like a clay maker, or that was his fingerprint somewhere? Like, can you analyze where Jesus left his DNA? Like,
listen. Here's an article from
ridiculous.
This is from a public publication. It's not even any kind of religious publication. It's the UK. It's the UK Express. So here's an article from that. Okay, and here it says the historicity of the Bible is a contested topic, with some historians going as far as to suggest the figure of Jesus never even existed. But a number of archaeological discoveries made in the Holy Land could put the debate to rest, according to the Bible studies expert. These are discoveries linked to Pontius Pilate and the high priest Caiaphas, two central figures in the life. Pilate was the fifth governor of the Roman province of Judea under the Emperor Tiberius. He is believed to have held his office between the years 26 and 37 AD, during which he presided over Jesus' trial, torture, and execution. Joseph Caiaphas, Ben Caiaphas, known simply as Caiaphas, was the high priest of Jewish Sanhedrin council who, according to the Gospels, plotted to have Jesus crucified. Tom Meyer, a professor of the Bible studies at Shasta Bible College and Graduate School in California, believes there's ample evidence to prove these figures were real, which in turn validates the Bible testimony of Jesus' life and death. Professor told the Express that archaeological evidence has come to light demonstrating the existence of two of the main villains in the account of the crucifixion of Jesus, the Jewish high priest Caiaphas and Pontius Pilate, the governor of the Roman province of Judea. Caiaphas was the leader of the Sanhedrin, 18 to 36, and according to the Gospel of John, advised Jewish leaders that it was expedient that one man, Jesus, should perish and the whole nation of Israel under the crushing weight of the Roman Empire. The human remains and ossuary of bone box of the Jewish high priest who put Jesus to death were discovered in Jerusalem. Caiaphas's ossuary is believed to be one of 12 bone boxes uncovered during a construction project in a small town in Jerusalem burial cave in November of 1990. His name features one of the inscriptions reading Joseph, son of Caiaphas, and two more reading Yehoseph bar Kufaya and Yehoseph bar Kafa. Professor Meyer said, as was the custom, the bone box was found by archaeologists with an inscription identifying the remains of the person inside. And it goes on and on to talk about these different archaeological findings of historical figures that was in the scripture. So we keep finding more and more archaeological evidence that confirms figures and people, places, and things that are stated in the New Testament. I mean, at what point are we going to finally say, for the skeptics, okay, this was at least an accurate historical account? They can deny all the supernatural and all those things. That's fine. We'll have that conversation another day. But when we're constantly finding more and more archaeological evidence, it just continues to confirm, historical facts in the New Testament, then I don't know, what else it would take. For example, with Muhammad, I don't care two shits about Muhammad or Islam, but I have no reason to deny the historicity of Muhammad, given the amount of, I haven't looked a whole lot into it, but given the amount of alleged evidence and the fact that most historians believe he was a historical figure, I don't have a reason to deny it. Doesn't mean I accept Islam. It's in fact, Islam helps to support the narrative of Christ. I mean, Christ is a Messiah in Islam. He's not the Messiah, but he is a Messiah. He's a great prophet in Islam. They call the Bible the Holy Scriptures. Anything in the Bible that does not conflict with the Quran is considered Holy Scripture. The only time it's tossed aside is whenever it conflicts with what the Quran says. So they hold to Jewish history, Christian history, all of it. They have no qualms whatsoever. 600 years. This is a religion 600 years after the life of Christ. That's when Muhammad, it was in the 600s that Muhammad became the prophet and founded Islam. So they absolutely accept Christ. And the fact that Christ, basically everything about Christ was true, except they say when he was put on the cross that at the last minute God had changed him out or something like that, and he didn't actually die at the hands, or he wasn't resurrected or something like that. And he is actually a Messiah that Islam is waiting on. So when you even have other religions that are against your religion that confirms your religion, it's like, I mean, how much do you need? I mean, really, you don't have to subscribe to the supernatural stuff. Just stop with the claims of there's no evidence, or, I would even be willing to argue about the evidence if somebody would just take the position that they're agnostic on it. Or, maybe he didn't exist, maybe he did. Something like that. But to say there's no evidence, Jesus didn't exist, is just such a fringe position that even people like Bart Ehrman, has very strong words for people who hold that position. And not just Bart Ehrman. I mean, I got if you look at my second podcast, I have an atheist friend of mine I've been friends with for quite a few years. Um, and unprompted. I didn't say anything about it. He clearly said himself that he considers, as an atheist, and he's a strong atheist, he considers atheists that are into mythicism as tantamount to flat earthers. And I was like, that was Britt. That wasn't me. Britt said that. That was an atheist that said that. He readily admits that there's plenty of evidence for Christ. He's just not convinced that the resurrection happened. He will also admit that there's evidence for God, but there's just not near enough to convince him. He thinks that the arguments for, the like the evil and suffering and things like that is, plenty to keep him from believing, that there's a God. And I totally respect that, but he's willing at any time to even debate the resurrection with other atheists. Or debate the historicity of Christ with other atheists. And that's most atheists that I'm friends with. That's not part of the newer group that I've been around, and I don't think that a lot of atheists realize that it's really a fringe internet new atheist position that even pushes to, I don't even think Richard Carrier buys his own stuff. Honestly, I think Richard Carrier was trying to sell books. He was trying to be provocative. I think he was trying to come up with an alternative hypothesis. If you look at his debate with William Lane Craig, I felt bad for for Richard Carrier. He's debated other atheists that's made him look bad, and I hate that because I think that he's a brilliant mind. And he's a really smart guy, and I really think that he's taken a provocative position on purpose. I think it's by design. So now y'all are chatting. So I'm sitting here talking and y'all are going away in the private chat. Man,
No, we're we
listening.
do that. We've been participating in this conversation, but you're going on monologues with Eddie.
That's what Dog said earlier too.
Gosh, wow.
It's good. No, it's good though. Like you laid out a great argument and stuff like that. So
Yeah, I was gonna bring up
a bunch of quiet time because I stop talking and it gets quiet, and I'm like, okay, I got to say something else.
no, you don't.
I was gonna bring up because and I probably gonna dip out soon. I don't know how long you guys are gonna go for, but I was gonna bring up Oz saying my standards would be too low if I accept an anonymous source. I mean, and standards of evidence at least. And you could make your standards of evidence whatever you want, right? There's a guy, and this is what I just typed in the chat, is there's a guy who goes on Cameron Bertuzzi's channel, and he's an A-Lincolnist, right? He says, okay, well, anytime you say who freed the slaves, he'll say you're doing a Lincoln of the gaps, right? You're positing a personal explanation when you don't need to, and the pictures could be anyone, and so on, right? You can be skeptical of anything if you want to. Sure, maybe we have more evidence of Lincoln than we do Jesus, but you can be skeptical, and that remains the same point.
Yeah, but it's still just writings from history.
Yeah.
Well, that's actually inside joke. We started that. I would say I didn't have a part in it, but we've been joking about the A-Lincolnists for years now. And it really took off. Some people really got a hold of it. And it's 100% trolling. That's just, they have put together some really good arguments for A-Lincolnism. And I think I mentioned this to you earlier, didn't I, Jim? I was talking to somebody about it, how they came up with this A-Lincolnism as a response because, just to hammer home the fact that how do you really know any ancient figure ever lived? Nobody alive saw Lincoln now. I mean, there's, all we have is writings, and then they'll revert back to the primary sources. Well, So what? There were primary sources. How do we know that those primary sources really saw Lincoln?
Everyone who wrote about Lincoln believed in Lincoln, which means they're biased, right?
Right, absolutely. You have to dismiss it, yeah, because that's confirmation bias.
Yeah.
He was legendary. He was made up because he was going to be the hero of the United States who ended slavery. So it's hilarious. I've seen some long, drawn out arguments and conversations for a Lincolnism, and I have died with the irony. It's just.
I would say we've seen, like, if we talk about impact on the world, we've seen more of an impact on the world from Jesus than we did Lincoln. Like, the course of history changed. I mean, Lincoln changed the course of history too, but I'd say Jesus changed the course of history.
There is no figure in history that has had as much impact on this world as Christ did.
Yeah.
So if he was legendary, or if he was a myth or something like that, he was one hell of a myth, one hell of a legend.
There's two hell of a myths, hell of a legends out there: Buddhism and Christ.
Buddhism hasn't had the impact on the world that Christ had.
Relatively, it has, because you got to keep in mind the East and the West have been relatively separate due to geography.
Yeah,
so you can make. I'm making the argument that yes, like, because of separation, right, at some level, Buddhism and Christ have both had really excellent impacts in a lot of different ways. But I would driving the point to different.
Not Buddha. I would say Eastern mysticism, because Eastern mysticism
is driven by Buddhism, though.
No. There's Eastern mysticism before the writings of Buddha. So. Yeah. And even today, when you look at a lot of the mysticism, it's not really, a derivative of Buddhism. I think Buddhism is just representation of Eastern mysticism, and probably its most put together form. Because I mean, it's just the East today. Even with Christianity, there's such a mysticism underlying all of Eastern philosophy. Let me tell you, the mysticism it permeates every part of Eastern life. It is not something that's just subjected to religion or spirituality or things of that nature. I mean, mysticism underlies everything in Eastern culture. So I don't know how one could. I mean, I understand. I do agree with you. Buddha had a massive impact on Eastern cultures, but I think that the Eastern mysticism that's there is something that was far before Buddha, and still to this day in every religion permeates it. Some of the things that I've learned about Eastern mythicism, as far as it goes, and even in their sciences, and things of that nature, it literally permeates every part of their life. It's part of the culture and belief systems that the entire Eastern Hemisphere, I guess you could say, was built on. But we need to have maybe a show dedicated to that, because I'd like to talk more, because I'd like to learn more about the, Eastern religions and mysticism and things of that nature.
Eastern religions are very difficult to understand because they're very different.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's a whole nother topic and a whole nother show and a whole nother.
Absolutely, I agree completely. That's I think at 2.5 hour mark, I think I'm ready to wrap this up.
It was good. It was good. Mark's like already bowing out, man.
Yeah,
play the outro.
I'm telling you, he's the youngest one here, and he's ready to go to bed, you freaking sissy.
I got an exam tomorrow.
I got an exam tomorrow. Is that what you're talking about? You got an exam, eh?
All right.
I know I probably have the worst Canadian accent, but I don't care.
Yeah, it's pretty bad.
I don't care. You know what? You got the worst Southern U.S. accent.
Depends. We'll see.
That depends. It really means what you mean by a terrible, terrible Southern accent. So, and let me let me tell you what, that is what I'm talking about, brother. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Oz, you are the shiznit, man. I appreciate you keeping the chat lively. James, I appreciate you keeping Oz on his toes. Dog, you suck. I think you fell asleep. I don't know what happened, but the chat died and you're still here. Mark, I appreciate your 5 minutes of contribution. Jim, plug your upcoming YouTube channel.
So the channel is called Meaning Forge. And so in it we try to figure out how do we make meaning out of life, through sharing stories, understanding, creating a toolbox, I guess, of stories of people. And so interviews would be coming, what it means to be an individual, what it means to have meaning. And so just kind of watch out for that content. It's in production, sort of. So it don't about a video every week or so, and then I'll start laying on some interviews here soon.
Sweet. I'm looking forward to it. I'm already a subscriber. I can say I was one of the first. You want to be one of the first to the future famous Meaning Forge. You should be a subscriber now. Since Oz hung out with us so long, and he's my boy, regardless of how mythicist he is, everybody needs to check out the Atheist Roundtable. It is a fantastic show. They have very fair debates all the time. They're straight down the middle. They're straight up people. They have call-in shows that's hilarious. Even Oz almost converted a guy to Christianity. You got to see that show. It was pretty good. He put on his old hat and he almost had this guy converted. So y'all check out the Atheist Roundtable.
Yeah, and both of us make you make more regular appearances, but I will be making an appearance in a one-on-one conversation with Oz today. So
yeah, absolutely. I might try to steal some viewers and simulcast it. No, I'm just
yeah, there we go.
No, I'll be there. Here in about 10 years, Mark will be starting his own podcast, so y'all get ready for that. But I do want to give proper congrats to or appreciation to Oz, and Pasta Mike was in here earlier. You know, I've said it 100 times. They're the guys who kind of pushed me towards having the confidence to start my own gig. So, you know, they're my boys, and you know, regardless of what we disagree on, you know, we're going to be right there with each other. So everybody have a good evening. I appreciate the conversations, guys. And with that, I got to come up with some kind of bowing out, you know, some kind of like catchphrase or something, you know. It'd be like,
I can share my screen and you can take mine.
Yeah. Here we go.
This the individuals.
Look at that. Mark just bounced out. I didn't even get it. Man, what a punk.
Well, you're supposed to be ending the stream.
I know, but dang, I was going to give some kind of like cliche ending or something. Yeah, we rock.